Okay, everyone's doing another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool comparison for you between Seiko and Grand Seiko. A little bit about Seiko. Overall, they were founded back in 1881. They're Japanese in origin and now have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end. And there's some little bit of crossover here with these two particular models. Now, in terms of the type of watch, I consider these everyday dress watches. Some key characteristics in design language: you're looking for something you can wear every day that does still really dress up very nicely. You're going to want a clean, classic, and minimalist design, and of course something that is very sensibly sized. On your left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see the SBGW289, which is a 1,200-piece limited edition from the Heritage Collection of Grand Seiko, which is basically celebrating the 44 GS 55th anniversary. And this is a limited edition that evokes the Sakura Kakushi, or the hiding of the cherry blossom, which is basically the moment in the spring when the cherry blossoms peek through the snow under the sunshine of the spring. It's a delicate pink with a silver tone and a very dynamic texture that plays really beautifully with the light. Now, next to it, you have on the other side the King Seiko SPB281, which is a non-limited production King Seiko that is essentially a reimagining or reissue of the original KSK 44KS. And it goes for a lot less, but it offers a lot of bang per buck. And it's honestly tough to find these comparables when you think of something with these smaller diameters. The King Seiko at 37, the Grand Seiko at 36.3, and then both of them being on bracelet. This is a very particular little niche window that these two have and share. And I think if there was ever any more of an appropriate comparison between these, you should probably compare these two, because you have no date movements, no date. The main difference is the Grand Seiko is a manual wind versus the Seiko, King Seiko, I should say, is actually an automatic. So there are a few little differences here and there, but these are probably the best in terms of really saying, let's go head to head and see how much of a difference there is and what's the gap in between these. The Grand Seiko is actually on loan from Belmont Watches over here in San Diego, so big shout out to them. Definitely check them out in terms of their inventory. They have great stuff, whether it be from King Seiko to Grand Seiko, and a bunch of really great prospect stuff, including tons of awesome Swiss watches as well, and even some very niche high-end Japanese watches like Chrono Tokyo. So they have a wonderful inventory, great team, awesome group of guys that run that, and they're just true enthusiasts. And I just wanted to thank them for giving me this chance to do a really great comparison between these two. So with that said, let's zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so these are on bracelet. They are time only, and now they're finally in focus. They have really interesting dials, right? You have that vertical brush. Here you have this gorgeous texturing. They have all of those Seiko hallmarks in terms of that, split 12 o'clock indice there. And just they have a very similar aesthetic, down to, doffing style hands that are just a little bit different than your typical watch. And then also applied logos for Seiko, and then of course the GS on the Grand Seiko, and they are relatively small. These are very classically sized and definitely wear like true dress watches. These definitely are a little bit on the other end of most Grand Seiko watches and most Seiko watches, where they're going to be a little bit more plussed up around 40 millimeters or above. Here you're going to get something below. Some might even find these watches too small. I have a 7.5-inch wrist, so I find these watches to be a touch small, but man, are they just so elegant. So let's start off with the watch that hasn't been seen on the channel before, which is this gorgeous this blush dial here on this Grand Seiko. Now, the street price on these, I should say, the original MSRP is $5,400, but Belmont Watches, and these are all sold out now, just so you know, these are boutique exclusives. And these are all sold out, but Belmont has it for 6,200. So not a bad deal considering that this is also the first use of this sized down case in terms of that 44GS styling in the smaller silhouette. So and it's also limited, and it's also one of the more desirable types of dials. Anytime they do this cherry blossom kind of very faint blush of a pink, people go crazy for it. It's not as dynamic as it shows in a lot of those stock photos, so it's actually, for me, more wearable and more versatile. And then, you know, there's going to be certain tones and turns when you might see that pink come a little bit more to life, but for the most part it's just a tint in terms of that pink. So for those of you who might be interested in this watch but are like, oh, I'm not a pink kind of guy, you can absolutely get away with this and never wear any type of matching accented pink. But one of the things that this case really accentuates is that beautiful grammar of design from Grand Seiko with the flat polished facets on the top of the lugs there. That Zaratsu finish is gorgeous, distortion free, and very mirror like, so really outstanding. It's 36.3, so of the two it's slightly smaller, and it does feel a little bit smaller. The crazy thing is the way that they did the crystal on here, the box dome sapphire, it actually helps the dial look a little bit larger. So the dial, even though this is a smaller case, it really pushes the dial out to the edges as much as it can, in terms of there being a lack of distortion on the outer edges in terms of that execution, versus the King Seiko here, which gives you a bit more distortion, kind of shrinks the dial down and kind of centralizes a little bit more, so you get a little bit more exaggeration. Although the case itself is slightly wider at 37 millimeters, it's the dial does shrink things down a bit, and you can see the box dome there is a little bit more pronounced, versus a little bit more vertical in terms of the incline in the way that that crystal does come to the top. And this is a great angle to also notice the difference in the lug width. You're getting 18 millimeter lugs on the Grand Seiko versus 19 millimeter lugs on the King Seiko. Also, when we take a look at this, it's 42.7 millimeters lug to lug versus the much shorter 43.6 on the King Seiko. But the King Seiko does have those kind of male-oriented end links, which do slightly extend the overhang, but it is such a short silhouette there versus that. And I mean, finish wise, some of you are like, oh, get to the part where you tell me the King Seiko is a bargain Grand Seiko. I think it is in a lot of ways, but the Grand Seiko is clearly the nicer finished watch. I mean, look at the hairline brushing, the high polish. Yes, you get those things here. They're just not turned up to 11. These are like 9s. This is an 11, this Grand Seiko, and I don't mind that. This watch, honestly, for me, is probably about as blingy as I like to get for my daily wear. So having this being a little bit more sedate, having more brush surfaces, some flat brushing that does allow light play without having a lot of actual real estate that's fully polished, actually does help me. So I like that about this piece. But you know, if you're thinking you're going to be getting this case with just a cheaper movement, it's not the case. You can see though, there's some nice complex work that's done here with that transition, and the brushing is nice, but it's not as nice. Look at just the, okay, look at that brush there, sandwiched in between two points of mirror polish on that mid case. That is just sublime. And then even the rounded nature on these links, there's just something that just feels a little bit more refined about this piece, and it should be. I mean, at MSRP 5,400 versus 1,700. Now, do I think it's that many times, 2, 3, 4 times the worth that? No, I don't. It's, you know, again, it's a small difference. The Grand Seiko is definitely nicer finished. I'd say though the King Seiko, it has something that's really special. That's just a level of balance that I can really appreciate. Of course, it is an automatic, which is great, so you don't have to hand wind it, you know, unless you want to, but you can just wear it and it'll stay running. Versus here, you're going to engage with it, and a lot of folks do like manual winding. It does keep the case relatively thin at 11.9 millimeters, but that's not that much thinner than 12.1. So 12.1 versus 11.9, that is not a lot of a difference there. You're still getting a side crown, you're getting the beautiful hairline brushing, you're still getting the Zaratsu polishing, you're getting the box dome sapphire, you're getting a time only in-house movement with no ghost position on the crown. You're getting something that has a huge history, right, in terms of Grand Seiko and King Seiko and their storyline and how they, you know, faced the Swiss in terms of mechanical accuracy. And then even, you know, and the Swiss, actually it forced the Swiss to start getting into quartz, and next thing you know, the quartz crisis happened. So a lot of story, a lot. It's not just a timepiece, it's a conversational piece, and I think that is there and it's equal. Grand Seiko, of course, is a little bit more, you know, mainstream, a little bit more relevant, where King Seiko is a little bit more niche. Some folks might not know what King Seiko is, but boy, is it fun to talk about. Oh, have you heard of Grand Seiko? Well, let me tell you about King Seiko. So there's a lot of fun that's there, and honestly, as you're looking, some of you, of course, might notice that, yeah, there's a 4 hertz versus a 3 hertz movement. Neither of these are technically a high beat, which would be a 5 hertz. But there, you know, we have kind of regular beat, and then we have a slightly lower beat. There's true low beats that, let's say, the actual original 44KS was truly low. It was like an 18,000 movement. This is beating at 21,600. So this is actually higher beat than the original King Seiko. Yes, there were other models that were high beat, technically, that were 5 hertz, but the one that this kind of mimics and reimagines was not that one. So, you know, before you get upset, oh, King Seiko, those are high beat watches. They weren't all, just so you know. And even the one that this is particularly paying homage to wasn't. So, you know, take that and put it in your back pocket. And then you're both getting, you know, 100 meters of water resistance, which is great. And yeah, these things are just gorgeous. They're on bracelets, and they are gorgeous dress watches. And know that neither of them have 20 millimeter lugs. Here you're going to get a 20 millimeter bracelet that is non-tapering, which I think still looks quite nice, versus one here that does taper from 19 millimeters down to 17, which I can appreciate. The articulation is a little bit better on this one, just because of the bracelet design itself. And I'd say the bracelet design is slightly more complex, but this is just finished to a slightly higher standard. So probably easier to do, but still executed better, versus a little bit more difficult to you know, to execute, but not taken quite to the lengths that they did in terms of tolerances for this piece. But those are really great. But you know what? Why don't we get them on wrist and see how they wear? All right, guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this King Seiko looks gorgeous. It does look small, but it doesn't look undersized, right? It looks classic, it looks retro, it has that aesthetic to where, just like when you see, let's say, you know, a Datejust, right? It's supposed to be small. And that's one of the things with this piece. It looks great. It looks like it's the scale and size that it's supposed to be. So whether you have a larger wrist or a smaller wrist, this watch is still the right size, which I can appreciate. Now you take a look here at the Grand Seiko. I don't have it, you know, this is a new watch. It still has the sticker on the back and everything. This actually is still really wearable. Look at that. That doesn't look bad at all. I think the aesthetic, definitely, even though it is, you know, it's just much of a callback, it does have a little bit more of a contemporary style because of that bracelet. But that is a good looking watch, guys. And again, I don't think that tone of pink is too much and too feminine or anything like that. I think, you know, this in your clothes, you don't have to wear pink to match with this or anything. This is still going to look good on a number of wrists. So really nice. You can see it has a nice way that it lays. You know, they're pulling out all the Seiko tricks in terms of the contouring. And then look at the beautiful beveled edges. Nothing sharp about that bracelet. Everything is really nicely rounded and finished and highly executed. Versus here, purposely sharp, but not sharp to the touch, because everything does have a fine bevel with some nice polish, smoothing everything out. But the light play is really fantastic on this piece. I mean, this King Seiko, I know a lot of people were upset, but I was happy that they put the 6R movement in it because it made it more affordable. Would it be great if they did one with a 6L movement? Yeah, they did. It was $3,000 and I have one. So I liked that too. And there's a space for that. It exists. So the thing that I always find funny is when I read in the comments, oh, they should have put this movement. Well, they did. You go buy that one then. Don't worry about this one. So this thing is just fantastic. Also, it does have brushing, transitioning versus being just fully polished like the limited edition King Seiko with the 6L movement, which is going to give you that 4 Hertz sweep similar to the Grand Seiko. Oh man, look at that Grand Seiko. Look at that dial, guys. These frosted dials from Grand Seiko are just legendary. I like that they're not too in your face. They're not overdone. They are quite subtle, and it's something that draws you in. It doesn't quite just shout at you like maybe something like a white birch or some of their more pronounced textures. These ones, they've got a little bit more of a slow burn, which I can absolutely appreciate. And then yeah, this King Seiko, I mean, again, is it totally outrageous, the cost? You know, if you think about the sum of its parts, maybe, but then you think about it as, hey, it gives me a lot of what I get with this watch that costs more than twice as much. Then you start thinking, hey, nobody says this is overpriced. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, give me more of that. I don't care if they charge more. There's actually they just released 2 versions of this case with different dials, more standard. They're going to be Sunray dials on, I believe, alligator or crocodile straps that are not cheap either. And they look outstanding. I might end up with one at some point. But this one right here, it gives me a lot of that same feel, you know, that same just technical prowess. You see everything that Seiko does, and it just comes together in a really great way where the theme is just executed to such a high effect that it's tough to think of something on the Swiss side. Like, what are you going to put this against? You know, a Longines? Yeah, that Longines is going to cost more than $1,700. Okay, I'll give you that it might be better regulated out of the box, probably be a chronometer or something, but it ain't a Seiko. And for those Seiko fanboys out there who love everything Seiko stands for, all of their triumphs and their history, and if that resonates with you, then yeah. And ultimately, Seiko is still a pure brand that is run and owned by Seiko. They weren't rescued and consolidated and aren't part of a different lineup. Seiko sets the lineup and the branding and you know, decides what's what for their lines. And it's not something that they have to worry about keeping Tissot or Certina or Mito or Hamilton, keeping them under a certain price point because they don't want them to compete with other watches. You don't have to worry about it like you would with a Longines, where they'll purposely, you know, make sure that they don't want it to compete too much with Omega, right? So there's definitely some magic there. And then of course they do have to make sure that this doesn't compete with this, sure. But at the end of the day, the King Seiko is something in itself just gorgeous on its own. And then, yeah, in terms of the pricing, you do have to, you know, consider where that falls within the line. But with all that said, there's no loom on either of these, but they have bracelets, so I guess a low light transition wouldn't be completely out of order. So you guys can look at the way the textures and the colors and finishing render on these pieces. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. Okay, so we won't go for the pitch black, but check this out. Got to get the low light transition because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of the times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of a building, walking underneath an overhang, maybe the shade of a tree, or just spending time in your favorite automobile. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to even include some high contrast lighting, which typically would expose any type of production defects or flaws within that finishing. But you can see that the light just glides beautifully uniform over that fine hairline brushing, and then that high Zaratsu polish is just beautiful, mirror-like. The only thing you're going to see is maybe a couple of fingerprints there, and maybe some particles that didn't get dusted off here and there. But you can see the way that these dials catch and hold the light. They still remain, although quite reflective, very, very readable. Check that out. Look at the way that the hands reflect the darkness while the dials just capture and hold the light in a very different way. Of course, that Grand Seiko with that frosted nature really, really holds the light in a special way, where this vertical brushing here, there are going to be points on the King Seiko where you get in certain angles and it can disappear a bit more. You check that out. Certain angles it's not able to capture as quite as much and retain that lighting in the same effect that Grand Seiko does. But man, are these gorgeous. All right, guys, so I loved comparing these. I loved having them in hand, just to kind of show you. Honestly, one of the main reasons I bought this King Seiko, apart from the fact that I just wanted it, was that I did see the value in that it, when you ask of this, no date movement, on bracelet, vintage sizing. There's not much that's out there to compete with this, at least within the catalog of Seiko. And then you step up to Grand Seiko, and yeah, you get something like this that is actually pound for pound pretty comparable. Yes, you're getting a GS caliber 9S64, right? 4 hertz, 28,000 beats per hour, regulated to +5, -3 accuracy, 72-hour power reserve with 48 AM or 60 Gauss of magnetic resistance. But you compare that to the movement here in the 6R31, also a no date, 3 hertz, so it's 21,600 beats per hour, which is going to have a wider variance of +25 to -15. Mine is running at about, I don't know, +1 or 2 over 3 or 4 days. So pretty darn good. Instead of a 72-hour power reserve, you're getting a 70-hour power reserve, but it's also an automatic. So you have to take that into consideration. And then because you still have the Sprawn hairspring, you're getting the equal amount of anti-magnetic resistance at 60 Gauss. So that is pretty darn nice. You're still getting applied indices, right? You're getting the polishes and the bevels and these dynamic dials and doffing hands, that 10 bar of water resistance that just makes it completely wearable. The slightly smaller lug width, but it still flows with the case. Both of them are kind of off. I would love a 20 millimeter, but 19 millimeter ain't bad. Or the 18 on the non-tapering style, I think was the right call. Otherwise, it would have just came out even more, I think, ultra petite. I think the size that it is right now fits a lot more wrists, will be simply by just having that bracelet that does not taper. And then if you want a nice taper, put it on a strap and it'll feel more at home, looking small, looking a little bit on the smaller side, because that's, the nature of a dress watch. Both have those push-pull crowns. the high polishing, the Zaratsu. I mean, there's so much crossover here. You're getting a double screw pin connectors in terms of the Grand Seiko. So there's two screws on each end with a bar that goes across, versus, you know, on the King Seiko, it's going to be more pin and collar, which it's kind of a little bit more set it and forget it, but a little bit tougher on the setting portion. But hey, at least you don't have to worry about stripping any screws. So it's not like one is, you know, 100% better than the other. There still are trade-offs. I prefer screws. Honestly, the execution on screw bracelets for Grand Seikos is not my favorite, because it's actually a little bit more complex to have a screw on each side and then having that bar kind of going on the inside. So it is actually still a bit of a hassle, and those screws are really fine. So luckily I didn't have to adjust this one, but in terms of my own personal Grand Seiko that I sized, I will say that it was a task. Although the collars that are in the King Seiko bracelet don't make it easy either from a pin and collar setup. But I've been rambling for a while, guys. Again, huge thank you to Belmont Watches for lending in this beautiful limited edition Grand Seiko. If you guys are looking for Grand Seiko, check them out. They have some great deals, whether it be pre-owned, pre-loved, or new like this one. Still got the hang tags on it, still has the sticker on the back, all that great stuff. You know, it's essentially just like you'd find one that was a display piece, right? Folks might try it on and it won't have all the stickers on it, but it'll still have the hang tags and it'll have the sticker on the back, and you'll get to still have all that fun, and it's gorgeous. I mean, and it's sold out. So if you want one that's new, you can buy it here, or you can just be sad that it's sold out. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.